Warsaw Pact. After 2 months of daily practice, Stan had finally mastered the delicate art of drinking kawa turecka, Turkish coffee served in the Polish style, or as he called it, coffee Tatar. It was a two-phase process. Arriving in a clear glass with no handle, the first order of business was to use a spoon to break the solid crust of grounds on the top of the nearly boiling water and vigorously stir them into the water. This required caution as the glass was much too hot to touch at this point, especially, as noted, it had no handle. Phase 2, wait. In Stan's experience, the time required for the grounds to settle to the bottom of the glass always equaled the time required for the glass to cool sufficiently so that he could pick it up without burning his fingers. Jumping the gun would mean burning his fingers unless protected by a glove or napkin, as well as getting a mouthful of hot water and coffee grounds. This inevitable beginner's mistake had long since given rise to the predictable and equally unappetizing Polish expression, spit coffee. At length, the waiter arrived. With a perfunctory flourish, he placed a glass of kawa turecka on the metal table that teetered precariously above Stan's outstretched legs, and then departed with a grunt. The burning reek of armpits and exhaust trapped beneath the cafe's moldy canvas awning swirled visibly in the waiter's wake. The heat that day was so extreme that Stan felt shackled to his chair like a prisoner of war awaiting interrogation. His gaze returned to the parked cars slowly sinking into the commie tarmac. Stan speculated that the record heat, reported to be the worst in 200 years, might contravene the laws of physics. Which will hit bottom first, he speculated, the cars sinking into the tarmac or the coffee grounds? No matter. In this heat there was no hurry to do anything. Ostensibly, Stan was in Warsaw as a volunteer expert to convert the Polish military-industrial complex to civilian production. He'd found one hot prospect, an infrared motion detection device used to detonate aerial bombs, which happened to be the same technology used in self-flushing toilets. The symmetry of that image was appealing, especially given the sad legacy of socialist plumbing. As for his wife Harriett, she got a free shopping spree at all the hen parties she could stand, or at least that was the theory. It had worked that way when they were in Egypt, but this was Poland in the early 90s, not exactly the shopping capital of the world, and the hen parties were very thin on the ground. As a consequence, it had been a trying 2 months, and there were 10 more to go. Stan leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and felt the heat weigh down on him like a blanket of baked potatoes. In the distance, a phalanx of shimmering heat flutes parted, allowing a disturbing presence to lumber into view over the concrete horizon. It was Harriett, slouching round-shouldered along the uneven sidewalk towards the empty chair next to Stan, her head gently swaying from side to side like an elephant plodding through the last few yards of parched earth to a familiar watering hole. She sported a beige safari shirt and skirt from Eddie Bauer, sensible sneakers from the Foot Locker, and a baby blue canvas sun hat. She carried the afternoon's loot in a powder blue canvas carryall provided by the Corps of Retired Professionals in Service, who had so generously funded this expedition. The bag had CORPS stitched on both sides in black with a little American flag underneath. Standing before her sleeping husband, a knowing smirk appeared on Harriet's face as she paused to savor the anticipatory pleasure of the moment, secure in the knowledge that Stan's nap was about to end. Then, with great relish, she lifted the carryall as high as she could and dropped it on the ground with a loud smack. Exhaling loudly, she flopped onto the metal chair next to Stan, causing it to screech sharply on the cement floor. Stan's eyes popped open. No reason to look, though. It had to be Harriett. It was always Harriett. He slowly gathered into an upright position, muscles aching and head throbbing from the heat and foul air. "Back already?" he asked dully. "No, Stan, I'm still out shopping," she said. If that were only true, he thought. Stan wondered why he'd settled for so little so soon and kept it so long. 40 years. That's how long it had been since Stan and Harriett had met at college. Within 1 week, everybody knew them as Stan and Harriett, the one-word couple. They were just naive college kids who'd never dated much in high school and certainly had no previous romantic involvements. Or at least that's what they'd thought about each other. Of course, Stan did have that one fling with a Korean bar girl during his time in the army, but he liked to think of it as research rather than romance. The results had shown promise, but when he returned home, there was Harriett, waiting to greet him with open arms. Oh, those open arms. How well he remembered those open arms. Looking back on it, they took on a sinister aspect, something akin to the gates of hell opening up to swallow him whole. It was not good to think about such things at his age, but Stan could not help it. Carbon monoxide and coffee had that effect on him. "Well, are you going to order something for me, or do I have to do it myself?" she asked. "What would you like, dear?" "Coffee and a bottle of mineral water, unopened. For God's sake, make sure it is unopened. You know how the Poles are, always trying to cheat us with their little tricks." "Maybe you should lower your voice a tad, dear," Stan urged, hoping no one had heard her diatribe. "Just order me something and leave me alone. I've had a long day." Now that he thought about it, Harriett had not been a virgin on their wedding day either, at least not verifiably so. She'd told me she'd had an accident during dressage practice with her favorite horse, Panther. Her story sounded like the first half of an ancient Virgin Mary joke, but he hadn't pressed the point because doing so might have led to too many uncomfortable questions about his own goings-on in Korea. At length, Stan caught the blank-faced waiter's attention and ordered. As the waiter plodded away, Stan surreptitiously peeked out the corner of his eye at the familiar tight-lipped grimace on Harriet's face. Lord, what I would give never to see those pursed lips again, Stan thought, as his heart once again sank into a tar pit of regrets. She looks like a constipated trout. Stan's mind was on a roll. And come to think of it, I wonder who the real Panther might have been. I bet it was that darned Bobby Cummings. He got more ass in college than a toilet seat. Old Bobby Cummings and Goings, we called him, and he earned it, too. Then Harriet's barbaric yawp once again echoed over the rooftops of Warsaw. "Stan!" she shouted. "Pay attention when I'm talking. I asked you what you did while I was shopping." "Oh, not much. Just thinking," he said. Disturbed by his sanguine response, Harriett pursed her lips together so tightly it threatened to implode her naturally pinched face. So much so that it took on the distinct aspect of a cat's ass. Averting her eyes from her husband, she squinted across the plaza toward the royal castle, where she noticed a rather large man wearing a black suit and a red fez. He was looking directly at them, or so she thought. Harriett kicked Stan's foot under the table and pointed. Stan caught a brief glimpse of the man just before a passing horse-drawn cart laden with tourists cut off his view. Just then the waiter scuffed his feet to a halt at their table. Harriett instantly forgot about the mystery man, preferring instead to complain about her coffee and water. After the cart had passed, Stan looked back, but by then, the man was gone. 2 days later, Stan was again catnapping at his customary spot at the Sidewalk Cafe. This time, however, he enjoyed the comfort of a proper padded chair provided to him by the cafe manager in a much welcomed gesture of concern for his well-being. By contrast, the old wired-back stool seemed like an instrument of torture, a phrase which had the unfortunate side effect of bringing Harriett to mind. To drive away that demon vision, Stan hummed the first few bars of a song from an old Marx Brothers film. This set off a chain reaction, and before he knew it, he was belting out the opening line for all to hear. Vivian, oh Vivian, you must have known Vivian, Vivian that... A trio of pigeons took flight in a manic swirl of feathers and dust, jolting Stan back to self-consciousness. He looked around guiltily. Lydia was the tattooed lady, not Vivian, he muttered under his breath while reaching for his coffee. Noting that only the pigeons appeared to have heard his singing or cared to comment on it, he relaxed a bit and returned to the subject of Vivian. No, Vivian was no tattooed lady, at least not that I know, Stan thought. Never had the pleasure, and that's the problem. Such a lovely girl, French, that cute accent. We almost became Stan and Vivian, not Stan and Harriet, Stan and Vivian. The sound of that is so lovely, like Vivian. Such a clever girl, the black hair and black eyes so deep, her smile so inviting. She lilted through life so light and airy, clutching her books to her chest. On to the next class, waving at me her toothy, "Bye, Stan, see you later." Stan gently sobbed. Trying to focus through the tears, he gradually became aware of the large figure blocking his view on the street. It was the man in the black suit and red fez. Up close, he looks a bit like Omar Sharif, Stan thought. "Hello, Mr. Symington." Stanley Symington, I believe it is. Stan nodded, and the man extended his right hand. "My card," he said. Stan took the card and focused through his bifocals on the embossed lettering. Simon Magus, specialist in antiquities, restoration, reproduction, resurrection. Alexandria, Bangkok, Paris, Warsaw, Berlin. "How did you know my name?" Stan asked, looking up from the card. "I make it my business to know all potential customers in Warsaw," he said, "and elsewhere." "Customers?" Stan asked, looking down again at the card. "What makes you think I might be a customer for, restored antiquities?" "Ah, the mysteries of the ages hold a fascination for us all, Mr. Symington, and I would wager your charming wife is interested in souvenirs of all kinds." "Yes, and for that matter, anything else you can carry," Stan said, warming to the subject. "But I don't know about antiquities. We can get all the arts and crafts we want in the market. What did you have in mind?" Something much more interesting than mere arts and crafts, but, well, I would rather show you. A picture is worth 1,000 words and all that. I promise you will be impressed." Stan grimaced slightly, half expecting to be offered the Gdansk Bridge at a discount. "It will only take a few minutes of your time. My office is quite close by. You will be back in less than 1 hour. You have my word." Stan didn't really trust the guy, but he was intrigued, and he had some time to kill. "Okay, let's go," Stan said, and off they strode in silence. Momentarily, they arrived at a small 2-story stone-faced building, sadly in need of a good wash. A light went on as they stepped into the front room. A small office with used metal and formica furniture, an empty water cooler, a coffee machine, 1 telephone, and 2 old metal filing cabinets. Stan was not impressed. "Don't mind this," Simon said. "This is only for show, in case someone looks in from the street. That way we can avoid burglars. Nothing much here worth stealing, is there? No, Stan said flatly as he considered leaving. Please follow me upstairs, Mr. Symington. Stan hesitated, then shrugged, and followed his host up the stairs. He was bemused and beginning to relax a bit. He had concluded that Simon was a harmless eccentric of some kind, probably a crook, but not a serious criminal. Besides, this was Stan's little walk on the wild side. Back home he could tell this story for years. Upstairs was very different indeed. Stan stifled a guffaw as he counted 12 identical King Tut-style caskets on display, just like he'd seen on the Discovery Channel. So what's your slogan, Caskets Yaku Mummy? Stan said archly. Excellent wordplay, Simon observed. Caskets just like your dear old mummy used to make. Your Polish progresses nicely. Stan leaned on the nearest casket and, struggling to restrain himself, added, This is impressive, but it's too big for carry-on luggage. Your reaction is entirely understandable, but please do not pass judgment yet, Simon said. Stan listened silently, straining to keep an inquisitive expression on his face. Please go ahead and open it. You will not be hurt, I promise. Supporting himself on the casket with his right hand and holding his aching stomach with his left, Stan bent forward and whinnied so loudly he was sure his laugh was heard 3 blocks away. Okay, I'll bite, Stan sputtered. Simon smiled silently as Stan lifted the lid of the casket. He barely got it up an inch when it flung open all the way under its own power. Stan stumbled back as a 2-foot-tall Richard Nixon sprang to a standing position in the casket. I am not a crook, the former president cried out, giving the victory sign in both raised hands and shaking his jowls from side to side. As Stan struggled to catch his breath, Nixon jumped a few inches in the air and spun around 180 degrees. Stan shrieked. It was Nixon's face again, on both sides, but this side had the body of an Apsara dancing girl, and only the head of Tricky Dick. It sang to the tune of an old toothpaste commercial. You'll wonder where the yellow went when you brush your teeth with Baphomet. Nixon stuck his tongue out at Stan and danced like a cheerleader. Baphomet, Baphomet, sis boom ba, humbug. And with that, Richard Nixon flopped onto his back in the casket and pulled the lid down with a sharp report. All was silent again. Stan leaned up against the wall, trying desperately not to wet his trousers. What was that? He said. Simon smiled and tapped 3 times on the wooden floor with the toe of his right shoe. Tap, tap, tap. In unison, all 12 caskets sprang open, and 12 little 2-sided Nixons repeated the I am not a crook and Baphomet routine 3 times, and then flopped back into their caskets. The lids closed with a single harmonic thwump. Then a jet of steam made a sighing ah sound as it shot up through the mouth of the Egyptian death mask carved on the top of each casket. Then all was silent. Stan turned towards Simon with the feigned menace of a frightened schoolboy. Okay, what was that all about? I was hoping you would be impressed. You know, I may be the only person alive today who could arrange such a magnificent display, he intoned, and then bowed with a brief flourish. Stan haltingly touched the lid of the nearest casket, as if about to open it, and looked at Simon questioningly. Go ahead, you won't be hurt, Simon said. Stan slowly lifted the lid. Empty. He raced from one casket to the next, pulling off the lids. They were all empty, and looked like they had been for a long time. Where did they go? Stan asked. Questions can be such an unnecessary burden. Let's just say I arranged it for you, shall we? Stan was speechless. After a moment's hesitation, he started towards the exit, muttering, "Yes, but... Before you go, perhaps you would at least like to consider my proposition," Simon suggested. Stan hesitated. He was well aware of the trajectory of this kind of logic. It could carry him effortlessly from one minor error in judgment to the next until he had made a monumental cumulative mistake, the kind to which Harriett was living testament. Okay, why not? I've come this far, I might as well see the rest of your hand. In that case, please sit here if you will, Simon said, motioning Stan to an old Chesterfield chair next to an even older wooden desk. You will not regret your decision, Mr. Symington. Stan settled into the Chesterfield's inviting creased leather as Simon lowered himself onto a wooden swivel chair in front of the desk. Now, Mr. Symington, I need to verify a few facts. First, I understand you knew a young lady many years ago named Vivian. French, I believe she was. It says here you met her in college. Stan nodded. Unfortunately, you lost track of Vivian after becoming involved with Harriett, whom you subsequently married. You are still married to Harriett, and she is with you here in Warsaw. Stan sneezed. You have no idea where Vivian might be living, or even if she is still alive. You and Harriett have no children. Is that substantially correct? Yes, it is. And I should probably do us both a favor and not ask you how you know all that. Let's just say I am very thorough, Simon replied. Now, my question to you is simple. Would you like to be reunited with Vivian? It can be arranged. And what exactly do you mean by reunited? Stan asked gamely. I mean, I will bring you and Vivian together again today, if you like. I must say she is a delightful lady, absolutely delightful. I spoke with her just yesterday. She very much wants to see you again, Mr. Symington. She talked about nothing else. And before you ask, yes, you will be able to stay with her this time. The choice will be yours. Stan didn't believe a word of this. Even if by some miracle Simon could produce Vivian, he mused, there would still be the question of Harriett, not to mention the possibility that he and Vivian might not even hit it off after all these years. Still, the mere fact that he was thinking about it proved that Stan's cynicism was weakening. He pressed on. So where is she? How can I be sure it's not a trick? Can I meet her before I decide? How much will this cost? Stan asked, hoping in vain to throw Simon off his balance. Of course you can meet her, no charge. Wait one moment. With that, Simon pushed a small button underneath the desk. Vivian entered the room from a door opposite Stan and walked straight up to him. Extending her hand, she said, Bonjour, Stanley. Such a long time. You look well. What do you think of me? She asked, spinning around so Stan could get a good look. Vivian, my God, you look wonderful. Is that really you? I can't believe this is happening. What are you doing in Warsaw? Oh, thank you for the compliment. You were always so nice. And yes, it is really me. Believe it, it is me. And I'm here to meet you, Stanley, she said cheerfully. It was Vivian after all, and she had aged well, astonishingly so. She hardly looked 40, though Stan knew she was in her early 60s, as was he. Dressed in loose-fitting beige linen slacks and a billowy white cotton shirt, long sleeves rolled up just below the elbows, she was the picture of chic. Vivian leaned forward, gave Stan a little peck on the cheek, and pirouetted towards the exit. Straddling the doorway, she looked back, flashed that quirky smile he loved so much, winked, and blew him a kiss. The door closed behind her with a gentle deet-donk. So, Mr. Symington, what do you think now? Stan wasn't sure what he thought, but the more he thought, the more he wanted to know. Simon, milking the master magician role down to the last drop, was more than willing to oblige. I am a facilitator of dreams, Simon began. I am made aware of people such as yourself who have, shall we say, a desire to rectify an unpleasant state of affairs. Let's be honest, Mr. Symington. You always wished you had married Vivian, or had at least tried, yet you settled for Harriett. We need not concern ourselves at this late date with all the reasons. Let us just say it was a wrong turn and leave it at that. Stan nodded sadly. Now I am offering you a second chance. I make no promises about the outcome, of course. I am merely offering you a second chance. Still, based upon my past experiences and my observations of you so far, I would rate your chances for happiness very high. In fact, much better than average. Stan sat on the Chesterfield thinking about Vivian and all those years they might have had together. He knew it was a fantasy and that reality never quite measured up. Still, it was a wonderful fantasy, and seeing Vivian again had changed everything. He looked at the caskets and decided to bury the last 40 years someplace it would never be found. What do I have to do? Stan asked. Just go through that door, Simon said. Vivian is waiting for you on the other side. No strings. You can leave any time you want and go back to your old life. Of course, I've done this many times and no one has ever come back. But still, the choice will be yours. Stan rose from his chair, giving Simon one last look. He strode to the door, jerked it open, and crossed to the other side. The door made a hearty chuffed sound as it shut behind him. Simon rolled his eyes towards the ceiling and sighed contentedly. Nixon's casket chorus gets the Americans every time, doesn't it, Father? With that, the Swiss cuckoo clock mounted on the wall above Simon's desk sprang open with a loud kerchang, and a cigar-smoking crow shot forward on the tip of the clock's metal tongue. Hoo-ha! Hoo-ha! You got that straight, sonny boy. 2 in 1 day. Hoo-ha! Hoo-ha! Give the kid a cigar. The bird handed Simon a cigar and blew a triple smoke ring toward the door. Thank you, Father, Simon said, rolling his eyes skyward again. He loved the old guy, but he was definitely over the top. Keep up the good work, kid, the bird said. I've got a reputation to maintain. Hoo-ha! Hoo-ha! 3 more concentric smoke rings shot out from the bird's beak. Just knock if you want me, he said, and snapped back inside the clock. For a few moments, Simon stared at the door on the cuckoo clock. I wonder where he'll send me next, he muttered. I've heard New York City in the autumn is nice. With that, Simon opened a large leather-bound ledger and made 2 entries for the day. 10 a.m., Harriett Symington reunited with Bobby Cummings. 3 p.m., Stanley Symington reunited with Vivian Bernal. He closed the ledger and pushed away from the desk. Yes, New York, he mused, leaning back and looking at the clock again. A change of scenery will do me good.